Here's my proposal to you. Be as plain as you can when out and about in the world. Why? How? Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast, your hub for personal development with a self-knowledge edge. My name is Philip Frey, and today I will be talking about removing the sexual context from a majority of interactions to facilitate better connections between people. Another way of putting it could be, look better at home than you do in public. This episode and this idea has been inspired by a meeting that I've had with a woman. And it was a first-time meeting, and the context wasn't a romantic one. It was more getting to know one another one. And what she did in this meeting was that she did nothing to enhance her sexuality or to introduce sexual context into that meeting. I think she had no makeup. She was dressed in a very neutral way. We talked for hours about subjects that mattered and were personal, and at no point was there any kind of sexual undercurrent in our conversation. Neither her nor I have introduced it. And of course I had met girls and women before, but this was the most relaxed and relaxing interaction that I ever had in my life with a woman as a straight man. And I could really be myself. I felt no drive to appear as someone different. And I know very well that often I do that. So it was such a refreshing break from that. And I feel I got to know her pretty well. I got a good idea of who she is compared to the length of time that we spent together. And my mind was really clear all throughout our interaction. To put it very simply, it was just so refreshing. And in my past interactions, something that I really enjoyed doing was flirting. Actually, if I had to make a top 5 favorite activities lists in the past, flirting would definitely have been on that list. And I had a lot of fun with it, but the truth was that it was always a very disconnecting experience. It was disconnecting me from really getting my true self across, and it was completely blocking any kind of discovery of the other person. And this interaction was the first major break from that pattern, and it was so interesting. So I went home and I thought about it, and there were other factors that made this such a great meeting. It helped that we both have done enough healing work to be a lot less needy than, say, I was before. There was a lot less of trying to gain something from the other person, more precisely trying to wrench some kind of affection or admiration or whatever, because we are both, well, I don't know her specific history with this, so I'll speak for myself. I'm a lot more self-contained, and a lot more of my psychological needs now are met internally. So that helps. That lowers the stakes. But the fact of her behavior and her appearance was still very significant here. And I recognized that, and I started developing this idea. Now, when it comes to heterosexual men, it is a fact backed up by studies that mental performance declines not only during, not only after, but even in anticipation of having an interaction with an attractive woman. A lot of my audience are men, so my guess is that actually even just saying attractive woman has marginally reduced your capacity to focus in the moment. And that is not to mention a whole slew of personality-altering hormones that are produced in the brain during such interactions. And I'm sure that this works the other way as well, except the attraction comes from somewhat different factors. Now, if you look into the role of makeup and perfume and cosmetic surgery, it is threefold. Number one, it is to scam the observing person into thinking that the woman is younger than she really is. Number two, scamming the observing person into thinking that she is more genetically favorable, reproduction-wise, than she really is, by creating, for instance, an artificial symmetry of the face that wasn't there before, which is something that we unconsciously recognize as a marker of good genes. And the third role is to fake a sexual interest that isn't really there. We read red lips unconsciously as a sign of a sexually aroused woman, which in turn get more favorable treatment from a man, subconsciously thinking that there's some opportunity in the situation. And I would say that the same applies in reverse for flashy cars and houses and watches. That is a similar kind of scam because someone familiar with how real millionaires live. And for more information, check out episode number 3, found at valiantgrowth.com/E as in episode 3, the number E3. We'll know that these are almost surefire signs of bankruptcy rather than wealth. And I remember observing this in my early teenhood, and I'm sure that you did as well, that when in contact with a member of the opposite gender, in case of heterosexual people, and when there's sexual interest, my peers and myself would go through a massive personality shift right there in the moment. It was almost eerie, it was unbelievable, and they would act like wholly different people in that situation. So there's a whole biological undercurrent around sexuality and around arousal that is not exactly beneficial for clear thinking. Now, why is that bad? The problem is, a person of wisdom will seek to very carefully assess the personality, the virtues and the vices, the history of anyone that they seek to let into their lives. A person of wisdom has standards and is always processing information about their company, whether in the moment of the interaction or afterwards. A person of wisdom also seeks to aid the other person as much as possible in their own assessment. A lack of clarity can only be detrimental to both parties, and a person of wisdom, when it comes to relationships, recognizes this. He wants to attract people who share the same values and admire what they are truly best in, their true self, and seeks to avoid attracting people for the wrong reason, for that can only end in disappointment. A person of wisdom and mental health, and really self-respect, is very selective. He recognizes that the value he brings to the table must be met by equal value, and it is his responsibility to assess whether it is or isn't. And on this, see episode number 19, found under valiantgrowth.com/E19, which is the 4th part of the core principles of relationships. Relationships are a trade. He also has no desire to scam currently more healed, more grown, more wise people into a sham relationship. Not only because he knows that it would be unsustainable and he would be found out fast, but also because he knows that if they couldn't recognize his scam, they wouldn't be worth having in the first place. There's the classic quote of, "I don't care to belong to any club that will have me as a member," that I really always enjoy. Now, contrast this to the mainstream approach, where every effort is made to, quote-unquote, put the best foot forward, to strive to deceive the people as much as possible that one comes into contact with. And of course, that's not how it's put, and those are not the words used, but that is the intention. And it doesn't even matter who it is, just catch a morsel of attention, a morsel of affection. Or you have a celebrity version of this where it is getting a constant stream of morphine, of adoration, or the political version where it is power over anything and anyone, and preferably everyone. It is beyond the scope of this episode, but there is a fundamental neediness behind this behavior, a manifestation of the never-ending chase for the unconditional love that parents were supposed to provide, they never did, and now these adult children are trying to get it from other adults, best case scenario, or their children, in the first case it being not only inappropriate but impossible, and in the second case this pursuit being actually immoral. Don't get me wrong, this neediness hides a tragedy behind it, a tragedy of traumatic or neglectful parenting. But there's a responsibility for looking introspectively at our own behavior and healing the moment we become adults. I see deep-cut dresses and short skirts and blood-red lipsticks and flashy cars and flashy suits and flashy watches worn in public as a desperate plea, an ad cast with no consideration of what fish or junk is caught in the process. I actually had a family member whose mother, on her deathbed, scolded her daughter for not wearing makeup in that moment and told her that she should never ever be seen without makeup, no matter what. I myself wore all sorts of uncomfortable and impractical shoes and clothing just to look more elegant, to project a personality that wasn't really there. And my proposal is to treat sexuality with great care, with wisdom and foresight. I think it's best to use it strictly within the context of a romantic relationship and behind closed doors. And even there, care must be taken that it doesn't distract, but adds a new dimension of connection. There's the pretty well-known phenomenon of early relationships being highly and exclusively sexual. I'm not talking about that. But sexuality has a very important role and must absolutely be explored. But wisdom must be used. And I think it should be avoided, especially in early romantic interactions, to facilitate clearer thinking, better judgment, and a deeper understanding of the other person. Call me unromantic if you will, but I extend that to other typical behavior as well. Consuming alcohol or drugs, sitting around in candlelights and soft music, watching erotically charged movies. Heck, even looking at a romantic sunset could be argued against. A friend once mocked me that, in my vision, a first date should be an exchange of CVs, which is a little bit extreme, but I would still go with that over many disconnecting alternatives. And let me be clear, I think that there's great value in many of these activities, not so much with the drugs and alcohol, but some of the others. And they are wonderful and beautiful and excellent and appropriate after the early phase, after there's a level of trust stemming from a careful judgment of the other person's virtues, vices, personality, history. The same thing goes for sexuality. It's much better as a gently unfolding flower than a napkin of chloroform to all higher reasoning on the first date. I suggest being plain in public and in all relationships where there is no intention for a romantic context, which is most relationships. I think it's well worth studying one's best features in order to be able to mask them and give consciousness back to our social circle. This might be a little bit more challenging for men, and it is a little bit more challenging, I think, for me as well because of that. Because to most men, and I will include myself in this, there's a little bit of confusion about just what exactly our best features are. Is it looks? Is it clothes? Whatever. Now, on the flip side, and this is a very important point to make here, being unkempt and ill-maintained is equally distracting. So what I'm talking about here is looking clean and simple. So that's the idea, and there's a funny side note as I was thinking about this. Plain in public, attractive at home. It clicked in my mind, that's pretty familiar. Kind of sounds like the hijab in Muslim practice. Of course, there's a world of difference between doing this as a strategic choice versus being forced to do it. Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth podcast, and I dare you to flourish today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it. At this phase, growth is the most important thing for Valiant Growth. Now, if you're listening on a smartphone, like I often recommend doing, and by the way, you can find Valiant Growth in iTunes, or if you're on Android, you can, probably the best option is downloading the Stitcher app, and you will find Valiant Growth. Within that, there's also a podcast application on Windows phones. But if you're listening on a smartphone, you might not be able to share it in the moment. What I suggest is coming back to it when you have the time, and you can find the Valiant Growth Facebook page by simply searching Valiant Growth or typing facebook.com/valiantgrowth, and you will probably find this episode there, and that's a easy way of sharing it. While you're there, you can also like the page and invite your friends to like it too. If you got this far and gain value out of it, I'm sure that you have some friends who could do the same. Also, I know I'm stretching it a little bit. Leave a feedback on the page. You can actually post on the page. I'd love to hear your opinion and maybe start a conversation. It's a growing community, and who knows what kind of cool stuff can happen when we all put our brains together. So once again, the Facebook page is facebook.com/valiantgrowth. One word. Thank you and have a